Hey, sixth grade. This video is for Thursday, May the 14th. Hope you guys are doing well. We are cruising into the end here. Today, you begin the last literature story that you're going to read in your literature books this year. It's called Sons of a Mighty Father. In the story, we have two brothers who've been separated from their father and their other brother. And this is all happening during a time of intense persecution for Christians. So they're hiding in the catacombs. And eventually we will see two of these brothers reunite with their brother, but they're not sure which priority is now more important to that brother. Is it his identity as a Roman who persecutes Christians, or is it his identity as their brother? And they're going to need his help in order to rescue their sister. So it's a action story and a story about trials of faith. After you read the section that you read for today, you have kind of a fun activity, I think, in your work text where you're going to look at this maze and sort of think about different paths through it. A little break in the action from some of the other kinds of work we've done. Then you have just a little check for understanding on the top here to think about the different characters that you've met so far: Peter, Vincent, and Barnabas. And then just a note that some of these, the answer might be more than one person, so you could put more than one letter next to it. And then finally, you're going to define some of the keywords from the story. If you aren't sure what the definition is, there's no shame in using dictionary.com or something similar to figure that out. All right, then in spelling, it's our last day before our spelling test for tomorrow, Friday. So you'll need to finish up the lessons for list 31. That means today you're working on that word web on page 125. And that word that you're going to use is attend, and you're going to do some different work on figuring out some information related to attend. And then finally, this is our last grammar lesson in this chapter, and you're going to be thinking today about common sentence errors. So this whole chapter has been helping us think about how do we write a sentence? What are the parts that need to be there? What about if a sentence gets really complicated? How do we make it clear? What are some ways we can combine different sentences together? Today, you're going to think about how do you know if the sentence you're writing or the sentence you're reading is written the right way, if it has the things it's supposed to have. So there's three common errors you're going to look at. The first one is sentence fragments. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, we really want to be people who write complete sentences. So a complete sentence has a subject and a predicate and some kind of punctuation. You'll see in your book on page 289 on the top, they give you an example of a sentence fragment. It says, a boy in Scotland. A boy in Scotland is not a sentence because it's just a subject. It has no predicate. There's no action. There's nothing to tell us what's going to happen with that boy. I'm sorry. It's not boy, it's bay. But a correct way of using a bay in Scotland would be to say that the Firth of Tay is a bay in Scotland. Now, in this case, we have a subject, the Firth of Tay, and then we have this predicate, is a bay in Scotland. So now we have an action and we have this completed thought that makes it a sentence. So our first sort of error that we're going to want to look out for is only having a fragment of a sentence, not having a complete one. The second error you want to look out for is a run-on sentence. Now, a run-on sentence is when two or more what could be sentences are joined together, but there's maybe a comma in there, but not the correct words, no subordinating conjunctions, or no appropriate punctuation. So they give you a couple of examples of how run-on sentences can be written incorrectly. You'll see one example says, in 1879, 75 people died in a train bridge disaster at a railway bridge across the Firth of Tay collapsed. Well, the problem there is it just keeps going. There needs to be some kind of way of joining these two ideas together. So in the second sentence, you see in 1869, 75 people died in a train bridge disaster. And here's the key thing that they've added. When a railway bridge across the Firth of Tay collapsed. Just by adding that one word, suddenly we have a sentence that makes sense, because otherwise we're just getting a lot of information and we're not really sure how it fits together. The final error that you're going to look for after sentence fragments and run-on sentences is misplaced modifiers. What's a misplaced modifier? Well, a misplaced modifier is when you're talking about something and then you stop and talk about something else before you go back to talking about the first thing you were talking about. So the example for that here says, I read about the accident in the morning paper. Now, you might be able to understand what this means. Like the person's trying to say that there was an accident out there somewhere and they read about that accident in the paper. But because in the paper comes after accident, it actually sort of seems to say that I read about the accident that happened in the paper. A better way of placing that modifier would be to say that I read in the morning paper about the accident. And now we know where you read it and then what you were reading about. So the modifiers are coming in the right order. Let's do together the 3 guided practice questions on the bottom of page 289, and then you'll do page 290 on your own. The first 2 questions ask us to read 2 sentences and pick the one that's written correctly. So number 1, it says newspapers in every state carried the story of the bridge's collapse. The other option is newspapers carried the story of the bridge's collapse in every state. Now, given these 2 choices, I'm going to choose the first option, and I'll tell you why. The second option has a misplaced modifier. It says newspapers carried the story of the bridge's collapse in every state. And when I read that, it doesn't make sense because I'm not sure if bridges collapsed in every state or if the newspapers were telling about it in every state. Whereas when I read the first one and I know it's newspapers, which ones? In every state did what? Carried the story. You see the difference? So we want to make sure we're putting that modifier in a place where it's clearly defining what the sentence is talking about. Let's look at the next one, number 2. The east coast of Scotland has 2 bays. Their names can be tongue twisters. The other choice is the east coast of Scotland has 2 bays, period. Their names can be tongue twisters. Given these 2 choices, I would pick the second one, and I'll tell you why. The first one, even though it has the same information, it's really 2 separate ideas. Now, they could have made that one sentence even just by putting in a modifier like and, a conjunction rather, like and, which would have made it one sentence. But instead, they don't have any punctuation in the middle. There's no conjunction in the middle. So it's just a separate second idea that starts without any connection to the first idea. That's why I would choose the second option. The east coast of Scotland has 2 bays, period. Their names can be tongue twisters, period. Finally, they give us a run-on sentence for number 3, and they ask us to write it correctly. The run-on sentence they have says, one is the Firth of Tay, the other is the Firth of Forth. That's almost what you want because they did manage to put a comma in there. The only thing that I would add is some kind of conjunction to show how the 2 should be joined together. And since this is just 2 things that are true, I would probably use the conjunction and. So my updated sentence would say, one is the Firth of Tay, comma, and the other is the Firth of Forth. I hope that's helpful. If you still have questions as you're doing your own work, remember that I'm always here. You can reach out by email or we could set up a time to meet one-on-one on Zoom. I'm happy to do that. Hope you guys are doing well. Hang in there. We are almost done. Talk to you soon.